Like, I think from my perspective, and I really do think I speak for millions of Americans when I say this is all we get. You. Like, there's no one else. Fauci's never going to do a debate like this. None of the other, top establishment scientists will go. Well, hold on, let me finish my point. Yeah, because they're cowards and they're wrong. None of them will go on Joe Rogan's podcast. Wait, what did he end up? You remember the pot that was offered for that doctor who was like, everybody should
almost $5 million.
Yeah, like everyone, he would raise millions of dollars. They won't debate RFK. They won't do any of this. And so it's like, look, I think a lot of people are angry about
for
this
literally
stuff.
the last
back to the point you were
75
making
years,
here,
the
okay?
government has
When
said
we're
that,
talking about the specifically the
can't
vaccine
have debates
passports, okay?
because they're
This
too
was
limited.
during the Omicron
But
wave.
now we have the
Right.
internet.
We're talking
We can't
late
have
2021.
Right.
There has been, at this point, you had almost 2 years of COVID hysteria, with the establishment being wrong about every single prescription along the way. And meanwhile, there's also mass censorship of any of the experts who come out against it. I mean, the Great Barrington Declaration, that happened in the fall of 2020. This is a full year later after that, after all these experts came out and said the government got this entire response wrong and ruined tens of millions of people's lives. But listen, if you look at, there's no question about...
They were seen as a minority group.
Yeah, but they were a group of experts. I mean, I don't know. Yeah, the ones who...
I'm just saying, that was shot down.
If you look at what Omicron did, okay, this was after mass vaccination, okay? It tore through the unvaccinated areas and the vaccinated just alike. You cannot look at one chart and say, oh, look, this area had high vaccination rates, and therefore Omicron didn't really come in here and tore through it just the same as it did everybody else.
It tore through it in terms of cases, not severe cases.
It's not true. Look,
I agree. Well,
and his name is Chris.
Again,
which is
we can look at the data. You can put the data up. I mean, this is what I do. But what I'm saying is this:
you do it poorly.
This is what I do too, with a much better track record, Chris. I'm just being honest. This is the truth.
I don't know that you have a better track record.
We all do, though.
Let me ask you this.
It ain't that hard to know.
Lockdowns worked. Did they cause more harm than good? By the way, there was no good that was caused, but do you think they caused more harm than good?
The correct answer is you can look again. I wish these things were that simple. Look, okay. I can argue yes. I can argue no. The government will say yes.
No, but I'm asking you.
The people who are in charge of the will say yes.
Do you think that lockdowns mitigated the virus and were not offset by the catastrophic harm that lockdowns caused?
That's a different question. And that's hard to know. It caused so much pain in this country that it's hard to say. How do you value what they believe was saved in terms of lives?
Go look at the Johns Hopkins study on lockdowns. They looked at all the lockdown areas versus the areas that didn't lock down. They found no difference in mitigating the virus. It was just the disaster. And I was against the lockdowns from the very beginning. I was against the ridiculous outdoor mask wearing. I was against all of the mandates, all of people being deemed non-essential, all of this stuff.
I get it. But it wasn't just America. You make it sound like,
I'm against it everywhere.
But what I'm saying is, but it matters that it happened everywhere. It matters, and it happened in other places longer. And
I can't
look
believe
at Sweden. How did it work out for them?
What? Wait, are you
greatly?
Sweden, by the way, here's how it worked out for Sweden. Lowest excess mortality rate in all of Europe. That's how it worked out for Sweden.
They had rates of illness in there.
Yes.
And then they didn't build up the herd immunity they thought they were going to by going that way.
Okay,
and why wound up watching that in reversing course.
And why is it that Sweden has the lowest excess mortality rate in all of Europe? Because of all of the deaths that were caused by the lockdowns. That's why. They were the ones who didn't do that to themselves. And man, I mean, you look at, Pat brought up the number of small businesses that were ruined during the lockdowns. That's the least of it. And that's huge. I'm not trying to downplay that at all. But you're talking about suicides, families breaking up, children falling behind, just things that people will never, and not just that, but also just, look, here's the thing, right? And this is what I think the media class never really grapples with. If I were to ask you, what was the cost of the war in Iraq? Okay? What was the cost of it? Now, you might try to find what you go, okay, we spent $2 trillion on the war in Iraq. Okay, there were 1 million Iraqis died as a result of that war. Over 10 million were displaced.
Women and children.
You could look at the thousands of America's bravest young boys who killed themselves, tens of thousands, if you want to count the ones who blew their brains out in the aftermath of it, okay? But then you know what the cost of it was? Everything that we're living through today in our country. Donald Trump being president, the lack of trust in the corporate media, the culture war, everyone being pitted. Like, these things have costs for your society down the road that are impossible to measure. And the costs of the lockdowns, it's going to be another 15, 20 years before we look back and really recognize it. By the way, one of the costs of the lockdowns was the Summer of Love. The riots that caused billions of dollars in property damage across you remember the fiery but peaceful riots of
This guy,
I was in there was
he's a comedian.
That was a cost of it. I mean, those riots didn't just come out of it. It wasn't just a coincidence that they came on the heels of 3 months of lockdowns. Anyway, I'm just saying that
I'm just telling you, the people that I talked to who made these decisions stand by them and say, but here's the thing, and again, if
I'm sure Dick Cheney stands by the war in Iraq too.
The whole party does, by the way. We went into the wrong country, and you talk about censorship, which is definitely something that is real and is getting more difficult to see. When we started reporting that Yellow Cake wasn't real, and Wilson came out and all that stuff happened, Bush came out and said, you're hurting operational security on the ground by seeding this stuff. The American people stopped watching the news. And that's what changed the reporting cycle.
Yeah,
so I know what it's like to have people come after you and be censored. I like podcasts. I have a podcast. I believe in this space. I think it's the future of media. I think digital media is the future. But the idea that we're in the same space and deal with the same scrutiny and all those things,